Greetings, Pathfinders, and welcome to Absalom Archives Current Events, Volume 2, The Skinsaw Murders. Charming name, isn't it? Last time we had a lot of preamble to get through, but this time we're jumping right in with our story. The PCs have returned to Sandpoint as heroes, valiantly defeating the goblins of Thistletop and their ringleader Nualia Tobin. Now they have a chance to kick up their feet and take a well-earned break, basking in the fame of a job well done. But fame isn't always great. The people it attracts aren't always the most stable, and when obsession turns dark, it can bring about the worst kind of tragedy. Trigger warnings for this adventure. It contains depictions of domestic violence, particularly against women, and also contains mentions of suicide. I'll put up a timestamp right now for that one if you want to avoid it. This leads us into Aldrin Foxglove. You remember him from Burnt Offerings, right? PC saved his life, and he got a little too chummy during a boar hunt, but that's really the last we saw of him. We all had more important stuff going on. Well, it turns out Aldrin wasn't just in town to enjoy the festival. He was on a mission to his family's abandoned manor, a place of haunted halls and pained spirits. Foxglove Manor was built by Aldrin's grandfather, Vorel Foxglove. Vorel was a member of a secret society called the Brothers of the Seven, which was itself just a front for a group of Norgorber cultists who venerated his aspect of Father Skinsaw. Vorel borrowed from the other members of the society to build his manor, with the promise that the society would gain ownership of that manor after about a century. This would have displaced Vorel's descendants, but he didn't really care all that much, because he had bigger plans for the place. Vorel was a necromancer, and like a lot of people who engage in this pastime, he had grand ambitions of living forever in perfected undeath. Why worry about legacy and descendants when you can be immortal? But the thing about becoming a lich is that it's really hard. You need to do a complicated and personalized ritual to remove the soul from your body and place it into a receptacle, a soul cage. This item is also highly personalized, made by the caster as part of this ritual. It's possible to gain inspiration from another lich, maybe take a piece or an idea they used, but you can't just copy from someone else. Now you can probably guess that Vorel didn't manage to successfully become a lich. After all, I haven't brought him up before. He spent 20 years at the manor working hard on setting up this ritual, but wouldn't you know it, the very night he planned to enact it, his wife Cassandra discovered his plans. She confronted him and destroyed his soul cage. This triggered a horrible necromantic backlash, destroying Vorel in a burst of disease and decay. His soul, already somewhat loose and ready to enter some kind of vessel, infused the very manor. It only took minutes for his vile soul to just go throughout the entire house. It manifested as a virulent affliction that quickly killed everyone inside. In one night, Foxglove Manor was wiped out. No one realized for days, and when the house was eventually investigated, the remaining members of the Foxglove family spent a lot of money keeping things quiet. For 40 years, the manor lay vacant. Then, Traver Foxglove decided he wanted to reclaim this part of his family heritage. He moved himself, his daughters, and his wife Sorali into the manor, where his only son Aldrin was born. For the next few years, they were a loving, happy family. But of course, since I'm telling you this, there must be a part where it all went wrong. Vorel Foxglove lingered as a malignant spirit in the house itself, his presence waxing and waning over time. He seemed to become more aware the more sentient living souls are in the manor, but that's just my read on things. Over time, he infected Traver's mind and soul, slowly warping him into a copy of Vorel. Sorali suspected something was wrong with her husband, and blamed the cursed Foxglove Manor for the changes in him. She was right, but that's more of a correct guess than a reasoned deduction. She lit the servants' outbuilding on fire before running to the house to do the same. Her husband, now almost entirely under Vorel's control, confronted and killed her. Stricken with grief, Traver regained just enough control over himself to go to a bedroom and take his own life. Their children were found huddled in a room upstairs and taken in by cousins in Corvosa. 15 more years have passed, and now Aldrin is a young noble merchant, eager to make his way in the world and restore his family manor again. He's re-established his family's connections in Magnamar, including with the Brothers of the Seven, who welcomed him with open arms. I'm sure they have only the best of intentions for our boy. But connections can't beat superstition, and Foxglove Manor now has a horrible reputation. The locals call it the Misgivings. That isn't helped by the strange noises, weird molds, and oddly aggressive rat colony that can be found living in the walls. So Aldrin has been having some trouble getting things patched up. He's had to make several trips back and forth from Magnamar, Sandpoint, and the manor itself. During one such trip, he came across a dozen Varisians traveling nearby, trying to shelter from a horrible gale blowing through the region. In a rare moment of compassion, he invited them all to bunk in his manor until the storm blew through. Here he would meet his wife, Aisha. She was a lovely woman, full of passion and incredibly beautiful. Aldrin immediately fell in love and proposed to her that night. Taken in by him, Aisha agreed, and they were married within the week. Those of you who know how relationships work might be seeing just 1 or 2 or 27 red flags here. While he could be charming, Aldrin was often mean, unpleasant, and cruel. His feelings of lust and passion for Aisha almost immediately turned to jealousy and paranoia, which the leaders of the Brotherhood of the Seven nurtured. Their eventual goal was to induct Aldrin into the Skinsaw cult, so stoking his more cruel and murderous side was something they actively engaged in. It all culminated in Aldrin returning home one night to find Aisha and a carpenter working on the house alone together in the library. Now, they weren't actually doing anything, they were simply looking at a book of Varisian history that both were interested in, but Aldrin wasn't in the most stable mindset at this point. He jumped to conclusions like it was an Olympic sport, bludgeoning the carpenter to death. Aisha attacked him, and in a blur of violence, Aldrin's marriage ended in double homicide. Aldrin chucked the carpenter's body into the well near the house, but couldn't bear to lose Aisha, so he wrapped her up and put her in the attic before fleeing to Magnamar. Much better. There he confessed to the Brothers of the Seven what he'd done, who promised to make all of this go away. As weeks passed, the brothers slowly drained Aldrin of funds and morals until he was desperate to escape the growing debt. Now, the Brothers of the Seven had been busy these last few years. They'd made a lot of connections and allies on the darker side of the streets, but their newest benefactor is also their most powerful. Zanisha is a Lamia matriarch from Zin Shalast, tasked with harvesting greedy souls to power Karzug's Runewell. She's come to Magnamar and done just that by way of brute force. Find a greedy person, brand them with the Sahedron mark, then kill them. Mark connects their soul to the Runewell, Karzug gets power. Given that, it's pretty easy to see why she'd love a secret society front for a cult of serial killers. It's like a chocolate and peanut butter thing. So Zanisha has a use for Aldrin. She knows that members of the Red Mantis assassins are moving in Varisia, working on a job involving engineering a plague. Big oofs on that one. And she thinks the mold and rats from Foxglove Manor could help them with that, which would secure a nice chunk of funding for her and the Brotherhood. So she and the brothers gave Aldrin a job. Get them a mold sample and a rat. This would square his debts. Apprehensive, but eager to be done with it, Aldrin cleaned himself up and set off. He got a little bit of cold feet though, and decided to pass his time at the Swallowtail Festival. Cue previous adventure. Since the PCs last saw him, Aldrin has done his job and retrieved the rat and sample for the brothers. He's also contracted ghoul fever and died, which was not great. Zanisha has molded the new undead Aldrin into a potent killer, another knife to carve sacrifices for Karzug. And his obsession from the last adventure is still present, now much darker and ready to do a lot more harm. He's already started stalking the outlying farms, murdering families, and raising them as a pack of ghouls under his control. Emboldened and confident in his power, Aldrin takes a great risk and begins going after the greedy souls in Sandpoint proper. With that, it's time to begin our look at the events of Skinsaw Murders in Part 1, Murder Most Foul. So starting off, the timeline here is a little nebulous. Aldrin takes a week from the start of the campaign to head home to get Zanisha's samples, which means he's probably doing that right around the time Thistletop is being raided. Beyond that, you have a lot of wiggle room for when things happen. If you want to give the PCs downtime to enjoy the town and settle into Sandpoint as less of a stopover and more of a home base, you can. But if they're eager to get moving, you can start things a few days after they've returned from Thistletop. Just keep in mind that Aldrin needs enough time to hit a few farms for ghoul minions. Personally, I think a slightly longer time frame makes a bit of sense, because otherwise Aldrin takes a dive off the deep end fast, but pace it out as best for your group. But before you do, remember the PC Aldrin has his obsession with. That's important going forward. If you picked an attractive female PC, his driving sin is lust. Be very careful with this, since it can easily go poorly if played wrong. No one wants to end up as an RPG horror story after all. A slightly safer choice is envy, which he exhibits if his obsession is with a powerful or charismatic PC. He wants what they have and to take them down a peg so he can step into their place. If neither fits, you can default to wrath and simply have Aldrin be an aggressive and emotionally angry little boy. Now, the book doesn't offer this, but I think there's a fourth option that could work, and that's greed. Aldrin was a merchant, and he's already been influenced by indulgent murderers and one of Karzug's minions. Zanisha is literally trying to find greedy people. Play up Aldrin's desire to possess things, monetary or otherwise. It ties into his backstory regarding Aisha and makes thematic sense for the adventure. Whichever you pick, remember not to go full bore right away. The PC shouldn't know this is Aldrin until later in the adventure. The adventure starts with Sheriff Hemlock approaching the PCs, asking for their help. Someone has murdered 2 people at the local sawmill. Hemlock specifically compares this to a situation the town faced 5 years ago with Jervis Stute, aka the Chopper. This can serve as a good red herring if you want to make this a bit more of a mystery for the PCs. And as somebody who went to the Fred Jones School of Immediate Accusations, I know it's always red herring. Astute's murders still haunt the town's psyche, and you can weave it with the narrative by implying a connection to Nualia. After all, they were both spurred to action 5 years ago, and Nualia did have demonic powers. Maybe she was trying to resurrect the Chopper's ghost. We know that's not true, but the town doesn't. Complicating things, and acting as a way to draw in PCs if the inherent murder mystery doesn't, is a scrap of paper found at the scene with their name on it. Specifically, it's whoever Aldrin is obsessed with, and the adventure gives samples of what to say for whichever sin you're having him focus on. It doesn't include one for any of the others, so if you picked greed or a different sin of your own choosing, you'll have to make something up, but it gives you examples for lust, wrath, and envy. It lightly implicates the PCs in the murder, but Hemlock isn't buying that for a minute. part of why he brought the PCs in is to give them a heads up about this and look into it before people start jumping to conclusions. Before taking the PCs to the crime scene, Hemlock goes over the basics with them. The 2 victims were discovered at the lumber mill this morning by a man named Ivor Thorne. The 2 victims are Banny Harker, his partner in running the mill, and Katrine Vinder, daughter of Vem Vinder, who runs the local general store. The 2 had been having an affair that was about as secret as a sunrise, often meeting at the mill at night after work. Vem has been detained as the only initial suspect, but Sheriff Hemlock has 2 reasons he doesn't think it's Vem. Firstly, Vem's outburst upon finding the news felt a lot more like an angry man lashing out in grief and not a guilty person trying to flee. The second is that Vem's wife confirms he was home all night, which means he has a pretty tight alibi. Talking to either man doesn't really lead anywhere. Vem's attitude towards the PCs depends on how they handled things with him and Shayless in Book 1. If you happen to skip that part, Vem can just be generally distrustful. Otherwise, play him as someone ready to accuse the PCs of being responsible for this tragedy, adjusted based on what he thinks of them. In the rare case Vem is friendly with the PCs, he might actually beg for their help in finding the real killers. Whatever his attitude is, remember Vem is well liked around town and his opinion gets shared around a lot. If he thinks the PCs have something to do with this, a lot of the town is going to start to wonder if he might be onto something. Thorne doesn't have much more to offer initially. It takes convincing to get him to talk at all, and he'll just repeat the story he told the sheriff. If the PCs can persuade him to open up, he does offer a new piece of information. Banny Harker had been skimming money off the top of the mill's business for years. The actual owner of the mill, the Scarnetti family, have a ruthless reputation and several criminal connections. They serve as another red herring in the adventure, but are ultimately innocent. Though they totally would have done it, just saying. Heading to the lumber mill, the PCs have a chance to survey the scene for themselves. The area is largely untouched and paints a gruesome sight. Katrine was thrown onto the log splitter and, well, log splitted. Banny Harker was clearly killed a lot more slowly, his body strung up on hooks meant for machinery. His face has been skinned and his whole lower jaw removed. Only a distinctive tattoo on his abdomen identifies him at all. Though that's less eye-catching than the 7-pointed star carved into his chest. PCs can recognize this as the same symbol Nualia wore and which could be found around Thistletop's lower levels. Evidence can be found of someone crawling out of the river and climbing up onto the mill. That would be Aldrin, who attacked Banny Harker while he was working late, overpowering him and preparing the body to consign his soul to Karzu. Katrine walked in and, acting quickly, attacked Aldrin with a hand axe. She injured him slightly before he threw her onto the log splitter, the hand axe she used now stuck in the floor. A strange putrid scent permeates the mill, stronger around the axe but obvious everywhere. Investigating the axe reveals caked on gore and bits of bone. The strength of the smell is a clue. A normal body wouldn't smell this strongly of decay even after a few hours, even left out in the sun. There was an undead creature involved here. Now this next part, personal opinion, it kind of undermines the adventure's structure. See, there was another murder site found 2 days ago in an abandoned barn south of town. 3 local con artists were found, along with a man obviously sick and mentally unwell. Aldrin had lured the 3 men to the barn using a note that, I mean, look, I'm not saying these guys deserve to die, but if you look at this note and then decide you want to go check it out, maybe you're not the brightest bulb. The 4th man, Graced, was a guard they'd hired, so they at least took some precautions. But clearly not enough, as Aldrin tied Graced up and killed the other 3 in front of him, driving the man mad. Then Aldrin bit him on the shoulder and fled, leaving Graced tied up and suffering from ghoul fever. Graced broke free from his bonds the next day when some of the town guards passed by, wandering outside in a daze. He was swiftly captured and sent to the nearby sanatorium for treatment. Now that's all fine, but it undercuts a lot of the red herrings and mystery the lumber mill sets up. It clearly can't be Vem since he has no motive here. The Scarnettis might have a reason to pursue small-time thugs, but that's a massive stretch. The only reason this needs to happen first is so that Graced can be quickly sent to a second location before the PCs can get to him. The adventure implies that Hemlock brings this up to the PCs at their initial meeting, which again, undercuts a lot of the other red herrings. In my opinion, a way to square this circle is pretty simple. Have all the events happen in the same order, but don't have Hemlock bring up the first murder. Have the PCs investigate the lumber mill while Hemlock sends guards out to check the first site again. This time, have them find a crumpled up note, which they notice is signed by the same killer as the lumber mill, and have that be what makes the sheriff approach the PCs with information about the original, now connected murders. It preserves the timeline, lets you move Grace to the sanatorium, and doesn't undercut any of the red herring leads the PCs may want to follow from the lumber mill. But that's just my opinion on the matter. The important part is to establish that murders are happening and to let the PCs know that the only living lead is located at Habe's sanatorium for... Part 2. The Thing in the Attic. Aaron Habe spent years as a doctor in Magnamar, accumulating wealth and treating patients. An expert on disease and mental afflictions, Habe decided to use his money to build a small sanatorium in the wilderness just south of Sandpoint, where the peaceful countryside could provide a calming place for his patients. It also kept prying eyes away from his less ethical experimentations. Habe isn't going full Marcus de Sade by way of Sigmund Freud, but he isn't too concerned with the rate at which his treatments cause people to no longer be alive. But while Habe started out independently wealthy, building the sanatorium burned through most of his money, so he looked for an investor to help him out since most of the patients he gets don't have much money or family willing to pay for them. But he also wanted someone that would be pretty hands-off, not interfering with the day-to-day, and he found that partner in Kaisarlu Zarin. Zarin was once a necromancer working for the Skzarni in Magnamar. Known as the Gallowed in his younger days, his dark magic eventually got to be too much even for the people he worked with. So he scooped up as much loot as he could carry and fled. Looking for a place to lay low, he offered Habe the money he needed in exchange for no questions asked and a basement to work in. Since then, Habe has caught on to Zarin, but the two have settled into a comfortable living arrangement. Habe experiments on the living and doesn't ask questions, and Zarin works on their eventual corpses and also doesn't ask questions. The only other inhabitants in the sanatorium are the patients, who don't ask questions, and 2 infernal Nephilim orderlies. These brothers are escaped Chelish slaves who are laying low after they fled, enjoying the free room and board along with the relatively easy work. They also don't ask questions. So when the PCs arrive, about to start asking questions, everyone's a little on edge. Now both Habe and Zarin know what's up with Graced. He's contracted ghoul fever and is about to die from it. Neither man has any motivation to cure him, with Habe wanting to study Graced's deteriorating sanity, and Zarin wanting to observe his transformation into a ghoul. When the PCs come looking for him, Habe really wants them to go away to keep all his shady shit a secret. With a little convincing, he'll let the PCs see Graced with supervision, escorting them to his room. When the PCs meet Graced, he's basically a minute from death. He rambles incoherently about his master, who told him the PCs would come. He delivers a message, with a different suggested option depending on which sin you're using for Aldrin. He then starts flailing about, snapping out of his straitjacket in an outburst of strength. He assaults the PCs as best he can in this situation, but he's a lone unarmed fighter against a party that's probably level 4 or 5 at this point. If the PCs subdue him, Habe apologizes profusely and begs their silence. There's not much he can do to the PCs other than just hope they agree. He only knows that Graced was brought here and was able to discover that he has ghoul fever, which Habe really can't cure at this stage even if he wanted to. While shady, he and the necromancer in his basement are just another false lead. Zarin is ironically though the PC's best source for the next part of the adventure. He's noticed, somehow, the rise in ghoul activity in the surrounding area and is mapping it out. His current project is a way to somehow trace the lineage of a ghoul back to its original infestation. Of course, as an illicit necromancer, he's probably not going to give up this information. Wanting to keep his comfortable arrangement, he'll likely rush into any fight he hears happening above, thinking they've been found out. Personally, I think the fight here is a little forced, but that's just me. Zarin is a jerk and a creep, but he is technically innocent of anything involved with this case. His map of ghoul activity can be a good way to lead to the next part, hinting at the dangers stalking the hinterlands at night. Honestly, it might be more interesting to lean into his project. Recruit him and try and trace back to the original killer as part of the mystery angle. The main goal of this part is to give the PCs Aldrin's message and confirm the ghoul activity. If the sanatorium doesn't appeal to you and you don't care to include a fight with Zarin, it might be quicker just to have Graced captured in Sandpoint's garrison. Have him deliver the message and complete his transformation into a ghoul in town, shocking everyone. Even if the PCs can't identify what happened to him, Father Xanthus should be able to. Either way, once the PCs have gotten the message, it's time to move into Part 3, Walking Scarecrows. Aldrin's rampage on the outlying farms has mostly escaped notice in Sandpoint. The people out here are independent and it's not unusual for them to go a long time without being seen by anyone except their nearest neighbors, which makes them excellent prey for Aldrin and his ghouls. The first victims were the Hambly family, who Aldrin slaughtered with some ghouls he gathered from the warrens beneath his manor. When they rose the next night, he welcomed them to his pack. He commanded them to spread out and infect other farms. In the time since, the risen Hambly family has spread out, sparking rumors of walking scarecrows stalking the night, frightening people into their homes. Dead livestock, pets, and farmhands have been turning up, adding to the tension. Eventually, the farmers decided to band together and confront the menace one night. Only one man survived. Maester Grump runs into Sandpoint, babbling frantically about walking scarecrows about a day after the adventure begins. You can have this happen before the sanatorium if you wish, or have Grump enter town while the PCs are there, with Hemlock waiting for their return with grim news. Whatever you decide, Grump tells the PCs about the farm south of town seeing walking scarecrows at night, coming from the Hambly farm. They all went out to investigate, and the scarecrows attacked, looking like pale corpses but feasting like ravenous beasts. PCs who have visited the sanatorium, or just know about undead, can likely identify the creatures as ghouls at this point. I feel like this is a good time to talk about variables that you can have in adventures like this. Depending on your party makeup, these fights can be fairly easy or incredibly difficult. Have a holy sanctified cleric or champion in the party? Congratulations, this part's gonna make them feel really badass. But at the same time, if your PCs are unlucky with saves, these fights can easily get out of hand and turn deadly. The PCs will likely want to head out and investigate, seeing the connection between these murders. Approaching the family farm, they'll see strung up around are several newly made ghouls, sacks on their heads to disguise their true nature. A few normal scarecrows provide false targets, while 2 people still cling to life. They don't have much left in them, but can be saved if the PCs work quickly. In the barn, 6 more ghouls lurk and wait, coming out in groups of 3 if they detect the party. In the house, a stronger undead called the Ghast is waiting. In life, he was a man named Rogers Craesby. He was once the caretaker of Foxglove Manor and still has an iron key to the house around his neck. The key has the Foxglove family crest on it, which the PCs can identify from spending time with Aldrin in the previous adventure. After eliminating the undead at the farmhouse, the PCs have enough clues to investigate Foxglove Manor. Should the PCs wait around, Aldrin strikes with another murder in town every few days, while making more and more ghouls from the surrounding farms. Wait long enough and you'll have the numbers to lay a siege on Sandpoint, but that should only play out if the PCs are wasting a lot of time, or if you think it'd be a cool set piece. If the PCs don't put things together, Aldrin's notes should become more and more obvious, referencing their hunt together as the biggest clue by 4 to hit the party with. Once the clues have all been put together, the PCs should head to Foxglove Manor, just a few miles south of Sandpoint. Part 4, Misgivings. Foxglove Manor is haunted. I mean, obviously by ghosts, but specifically I mean the game mechanic haunts. Think of it like a mix between a trap and a monster. The nature of the house as a pseudo-soul jar means that all the deaths that have happened here over the years have left an imprint. Each haunt in the house can be divided into one of 7 categories. The easiest is the universal haunts, which just affect everyone. The other 6 are tied to specific emotions and should only affect a single PC, who most thematically fits. If you have more than 6 PCs, well, first off, I'm sorry for all the extra work you're gonna have to go through. But second, you'll need to either invent a new category or double people up. If you have less than 6, which is much more likely, just assign PCs appropriately and then make the rest of the haunts universal. Just for fun, let's go over the haunts in the order they died. Cassandra Foxglove's soul manifests for either a female PC or someone that has experienced betrayals in the past. It's born less from her anger and more from Voral's anger at her for interrupting his ritual, which he views as a betrayal. Her haunts are labeled as wrathful. Voral Foxglove's soul infuses the entire house, but his specific haunts should also manifest for either a male PC or one who fears diseases. Without that, pick the PC most comfortable with necromancy. His haunts are labeled as festering. Sorali Foxglove's soul manifests for either violent PCs, fire-obsessed PCs, or someone who's depressed. Her haunts are labeled as burning. Traver Foxglove's soul manifests for impulsive PCs, or whoever the party might consider the least trustworthy. His haunts are labeled as insane. Aisha Foxglove's soul manifests for people that are romantically involved or who express a desire for revenge. Her haunts are labeled as vengeful. And lastly, a shred of Aldrin's soul manifests for the PC he's obsessed with. His haunts are labeled as obsessed. Very, very original. If you have to pick, I'd say Aisha, Aldrin, Voral, and Cassandra are the most important haunts to personalize. The other 2 are important to the history, but they don't add as much to the overall mystery here. Aldrin and Aisha are relevant to the PC's immediate issues, while Voral is the most linked to what's actually going on, and Cassandra is the most thematically linked to him. The first thing the PCs will see when approaching Foxglove Manor is the burned-down servant building, the only thing Sorali was able to successfully destroy. A few sickly-looking ravens perch here. This foreshadows a creepy encounter that happens the first time the PCs leave the house. When they do, the building is covered in these birds, forming a swarm of undead called a carrion storm. Very dramatic set piece, but be careful when using it, since a group of retreating PCs will pretty likely be tapped out for resources, and swarms are notoriously deadly as a creature type if you can't deal with their specific defenses. The well out here looks like an average well at first glance, but it actually leads down to a system of caves below the house. Unless the PCs specifically climb down here or have abnormally good dark vision, they can't really tell that from above, with the rock wall overhanging too much to see down. Actually entering the house proper can be done at 2 places. More if they're willing to break windows, but let's assume the PCs are trying doors for now. The entrance hall sets the stage for the state of the manor, wet, warped, and smelling of mold and mildew. Various hunt trophies line the walls, and the center is dominated by a large stuffed creature with a lion's body, scorpion's tail, and bat-like wings. The Manticore trophy is still pretty impressive and is also the source of our first haunt. A burning haunt, the first impression the PCs get is a whiff of singed fur and charred flesh. The second time they pass by the Manticore, a much more dramatic manifestation happens. The Manticore's face shifts to resemble a woman, and a fiery echo lashes out, attempting to light a PC on fire. Remember, the flames can only affect the PC specifically targeted by the burning haunt, but the party and that PC don't know that, so that's a good way to emphasize how these haunts actually work. The second entrance leads to a room in a similar state of decay, but its centerpiece is a piano. Heavily damaged by age and neglect, the piano here manifests a vengeful haunt, playing a distorted version of a Varisian dance. The haunted PC is swept up into a dance with a ghostly Aisha that only they can see, her beautiful features slowly melting away into the pained look of someone being strangled, a gruesome hint towards the woman's eventual fate. The lounge has our first universal haunt, manifesting as a small swirl of dust seeming to move in a breeze. Observation shows it seems to move back and forth like a person pacing. Anyone that interacts gets the impression of a wife, worried for the things her husband is doing in the basement below. They might be overcome with an urge to drag their friends from the house immediately, which could trigger the Carrion Storm fight or some other haunts that need a second pass. Now our next room really exists to set up the things the PCs will encounter as they move down in the house. Rats infest the walls and floors of the manor, plagued by a disease born from Voral's lingering spirit. One such rat has trapped itself inside the wash tub, unable to escape. This rat is blind and in pain from the disease it hasn't fully acclimated to, making it a pitiful sight. The rat isn't a danger, any PC could kill it by sneezing at this point, but it does carry a dangerous disease. Characters examining the thing risk exposure, which can certainly cause complications. The library on the ground floor was the site of Aldrin's murder of his wife, and the scene looks pretty much how Aldrin left it, minus the bodies he removed. Aisha's scarf can be found on a fallen chair. As the thing used to kill her, it's haunted by her desire for revenge and manifests as a vengeful haunt, wrapping around a PC's throat and attempting to strangle them. A ghostly image of Aldrin appears to them, holding the scarf, while the PC feels like they've become Aisha at the moment of her death. The last room down here is the dining room, and while it doesn't contain a haunt, it does contain Voral Foxglove's lingering ego. While there could be a wonderful view of the coast here, the windows are all stained glass. This is because the entire side of the house, from attic to basement, is a monument to Voral's transformation into a lich. The windows on this floor represent the construction of his soul cage, which he made using the body parts from 4 long-lived creatures, a treant, rock, sphinx, and kraken. The PCs can move up or down as they want, but the adventure goes up first, so that's where we'll head to. There are 2 staircases leading upwards. One here is pretty open, but this one is enclosed and has a creepy echo from the steps settling behind the PCs, which you can play up if you want. On the upper floor we have a few bedrooms. Here on the right is Aldrin's childhood room, where he and his sisters hid while their mother attempted to burn the house down. There's an obsessed haunt here in this room that forces a PC to relive this trauma, convinced they are in the same situation for a brief moment. Other side of the house features a guest bedroom almost completely overgrown with mold. While the mold is gross, it's only as unhealthy as normal mold. It will grow back unnaturally fast, since like all the mold in the house, it's tied to Voral's spirit, but it's not supernaturally dangerous or anything. What is dangerous is the festering haunt localized here, from when Cassandra Foxglove and her daughter Lori died. The afflicted PC feels an itching on their face that compels them to claw at their own skin, though no one else sees anything amiss. The master bedroom here was destroyed by Aldrin in a fit of rage and grief after he put Aisha's body in the attic. The only thing he spared was the painting of her he'd recently commissioned, which he just turned around. The wrathful haunt here resonates with that hatred, compelling the PC it afflicts to express a highly misogynistic form of anger. The last bedroom requires passing through a portrait gallery where pictures of the Foxglove family still hangs. These portraits are all covered in cobwebs, which if cleared away triggers a universal haunt. The Foxgloves all shift, changing to reflect the horrible way they all died. Voral bursts into a mass of mold and fungus, attempting to infect the PCs with his disease before the room reverts to normal. The bedroom here looks normal by comparison to the rest of the house, just very neglected. The insane haunt here is connected to Traver, who ended his own life in this room. The PC it targets will need to fight against a compulsion to move to the desk and repeat Traver's actions. I would be very careful with running this haunt. Some people might be fine with this, but check in with players just to make sure. Always better safe than sorry. The last room up here is the second part of the bragging window. It contains depictions of animals and plants that are classically used as necromancy spell components, particularly associated with the transformation into a lich. Up to the attic we go! Stairs up are located here, and come out here. There isn't a whole lot up here beyond storage and some old servants' quarters. The observation room here contains windows depicting 2 people, both of whom inspired Voral's transformation into a lich. They are somewhat ironic, though I don't have time to fully get into why that is right now. The left one is intact and features Erasni, the undead queen of Geb. The right one has a broken lower half and features a man named Socorro, the butcher of Carrion Hill. Once a servant of the Whispering Tyrant, Socorro has gone into hiding after the Shining Crusade. It's definitely 2 interesting picks to be sure. The broken window is where Sorali confronted Traver and was killed by him, falling through. The burning haunt here will compel a PC to throw themselves through the other window, a fall that could prove fatal depending on how they roll with it. Traver had a private study up here where he read of far-off locations and adventures while regretting his choices to settle down. The insane haunt here fills the PCs with basically a midlife crisis. Truly the worst thing you can possibly experience, am I right? The biggest thing in the attic is Aisha. Would it surprise you to learn that she, like almost everyone else who died in this house, came back as an undead? 'Cause she did. Specifically, she lurks in the locked room here as a revenant. This kind of undead is filled with self-hatred and personal loathing, and Aisha's reflection in the full-length mirror is causing her intense distress. Unless the PCs provoke her, she'll remain effectively trapped in despair here. If they cover the mirror, Aisha will recover almost instantly and turn her hatred towards her murderer. Revenants can supernaturally sense their killer's location, and Aisha will sprint to the basement where she can feel Aldrin lurking. She'll only turn her ire to the PCs if they're wearing her scarf from the library lower in the house. If the PCs ignore the basement, Aisha is a great way to funnel them down there after they've explored the rest of the house. You can also use her to piece together the clues the adventure has been sprinkling in front of the group so far, at least in regards to her and Aldrin's situation. Zooming ourselves down to the basement, the first notable room is Voral's monument to his own unsubtle ambitions. While the basement is underground, this part sticks out onto the cliff enough for there to be windows. These two depict Voral's final steps for achieving lichdom and are connected to the wrathful haunt in this room. The haunted character experiences Voral's whole process, as depicted in stained glass. If their will slips, the PCs could be filled with a terrible fear that Voral has succeeded and is stalking them as a lich even now. Aisha will lead the PCs here to a staircase descending into the rock. The space down here was once a shrine to Urgathoa, so eroded it looks like a natural cave. Voral knew about this cavern, concealing the stairs he built from his family. When the Brotherhood of the Seven investigated the place, they magically moved the stone to seal it, as a precaution. Aldrin recently reopened the space to obtain the samples Zanisha needed. An obsessed haunt triggers here, showing the PCs a vision of Aldrin digging through the floor, muttering about how it's all for them. When he breaks through, they see a flood of ghouls bursting through the floor. Again, these haunts are only visible to that specific PC, so everyone else just sees a hole with nothing happening. Several ghouls do lurk in these tunnels, as well as a pack of goblins that Aldrin has turned into ghasts. But the most dangerous creature in the tunnels is Aldrin himself, whose undeath and madness have fractured his mind into 3 distinct personas. The first is the one that signed all his little notes, his lordship. All that remains of Aldrin's more noble demeanor in life, his lordship is mostly a sniveling coward who fears the emergence of the other 2 personalities. Voral's influence is most felt in the Hunter, Aldrin's more feral persona who's been stalking the farms with his ghoul pack. The last one though, both the Hunter and his lordship fear the Skinsaw Man. Aldrin's persona most influenced by the cult in Magnamar, the Skinsaw Man could grow to be a fantastic champion of Norgorber if he's allowed to continue growing in power. Confronting him here in the manor will put an end to the undeath and murder stalking Sandpoint. Aisha will help the PCs if she's here, and in fact she has a good chance of simply killing Aldrin herself if he can't call for allies. For all his newfound power, her undead form counters most of his. It can be a little anticlimactic for the PCs to find Aldrin already defeated if they take a while though. Once he's dead, Aisha should be free to move on. This room also contains the nexus of Voral Foxglove's soul currently suffusing the manor. Destroying the fungus is difficult, conventional means only get rid of it for a day. Only magic that consecrates the area truly frees the house from Voral's horrible spirit. Once Aldrin is dead, the investigation of his things will reveal a note from Zanisha, which is your breadcrumb for the rest of this adventure. Aldrin might have been out here alone, but he wasn't acting alone. The city of Magnamar beckons as the PCs track down Aldrin's backers and allies in the next part, Part 5, Chasing the Skinsaw. This part is a lot shorter than the last few. While the PCs are free to explore Magnamar as much as they want, their main lead is Aldrin's currently abandoned townhouse. He hasn't lived here properly for months, but since he isn't legally considered dead, the building is still his property. Part of this is that the Skinsaw cult has a member in Magnamar's justice system to help throw people off their trail. Zanisha and her cult allies are very invested in Aldrin and will start moving once he doesn't report in. The PCs will likely be watched as soon as they enter Magnamar, doubly so if they start asking around about Foxglove. To try and throw the PCs off, the cult has hired the service of 2 shapeshifters called Faceless Stalkers to ambush them. They take the form of Aisha and Aldrin and wait in the house pretending to simply be a normal couple. Obviously the PCs know that Aldrin and Aisha are dead, but it does present a complication to work around. After all, neighbors and street watchers will react poorly to what looks like a murderous home invasion. However the PCs get access to the house, searching it will eventually reveal a ledger of Aldrin's expenses. This book, stored in a secret compartment along with Aldrin's legal paperwork and the deed to his manor, shows the PCs the poor state of his financials. The biggest flag is an expense labeled Aisha's trip to Absalom, which costs 200 gold a week and is paid to someone called B7. Aldrin was apparently pretty bad at the whole secret part of this conspiracy. The payments were delivered to a place called the 7 Sawmill, so that's where we're headed next. Part 6, the 7 Sawmill. The Brothers of the Seven is an ironically named secret society. Its name seems to come from the number of founders it had, but the similarity to the Sihedron rune from Thassalon is quite convenient for their current controller. The original society was simply a cover for the Skinsaw cult recruitment, and one of its founders is the elf Justice Ironbriar. His long life and high social standing has allowed him to lead the cult quite well. His small sect of murderers were able to get away with a lot, using his position in the legal system to avoid repercussions and stay ahead of the city guard. Ironbriar initially thought Zanisha wanted him for those city connections, but it's the cult that she's more interested in. To make things more convenient for her, she's used her magical powers to charm Ironbriar. Now instead of killing Norgorber's targets, the cult gathers greedy souls for Karzug. The 7th Sawmill has the appearance of a legitimate business from the outside. The workers here are cultists, dressed in regular garb during the day, but their masks and weapons are in easy reach. When the PCs eventually roll up to investigate, the cult should be waiting for them. Ironbriar has been keeping track of them as they move through the city, and should be waiting in ambush. 13 cultists are scattered throughout the mill, while Justice Ironbriar can likely be found in the locked office in the back. How things play out depends a lot on how the PCs approach the building. If they come in during the day, the cultists working will try to keep things civil, keeping the PCs occupied and throwing them off their trail. If the PCs come at night, they stumble upon all the cultists and Ironbriar sacrificing their latest victim the way Zanisha wants them to. In that case, the fight is going to be incredibly hard. If it comes to combat during the day, the other cultists working will come running to their comrades' aid as soon as they can. The biggest variable is Ironbriar's charm effect. If the PCs remove it, he immediately realizes what's happened to him and switches sides, to the point of surrendering to the PCs. If they don't seem inclined to stop, he'll flee for his life, but if they are willing to talk, he proposes a plan. Give him 12 hours to flee the city and he'll reveal Zanisha's hideout and the strength of her current guardians. The way this part is presented, it's very open-ended on what the PCs should do to investigate. It can be hard to signal to the PCs that Ironbriar has a charm effect on him that they can dispel. This isn't like a video game where he has a health bar and a displayed debuffs section after all. His office doors have a bunch of documents that can point you to the next location, but that feels like a repeat of Foxglove's townhouse to me. In fact, honest opinion, I think you could probably combine these two parts. Either have Ironbriar waiting for the PCs at the townhouse, or have Aldrin's logs at the manor point directly to the next part instead of the sawmill. It feels just a little more streamlined that way. If your players are interested in a long investigation around Magmar, it can make sense to use both these locations, but if they seem to want to get things done quickly and efficiently, I'd suggest skipping one of them. Whatever you decide to do with these parts, it all culminates with the PCs discovering Zanisha's hideout, a rundown clock tower rotting in the shadow of the Irespan Bridge. Chapter 7, Shadows of Time. The Shadow Clock is a local curiosity, a leaning clock tower forever stuck at 3 o'clock. Locals have been placing bets on when it will finally collapse for years now, but the place keeps standing. Its rundown and abandoned nature makes it the perfect place for Zanisha to set up her lair. Now, Zanisha does have the ability to take a human form and walk through the city incognito, but it does remove a lot of her more deadly combat options, so she prefers to stay in the clock tower. Her eventual goal is to get enough power together to sacrifice the mayor of Magnamar, a man named Haldmir Groberus. A very greedy and corrupt official, his soul would be quite useful for Karzug, but the Skinsaw cult doesn't have quite enough power to get away with that kind of kill just yet. Zanisha isn't the only thing in this building. Vorel Foxglove's final contribution to the Brothers of the Seven was a large flesh golem, named the Scarecrow. It gained sentience decades ago and has worked with the cult ever since. It now prefers its new home with Zanisha over the Sawmill and works for her very willingly. It's smart enough to remain motionless and undetected while the PCs climb the clock tower in search of its mistress, so it can pincer them with the 3 faceless stalkers that lurk farther above. Zanisha won't engage the PCs unless she feels she can make a difference in a fight, or they discover her. The Lamia is incredibly cunning and deadly in a fight, having an array of powerful spells and magical defenses. The PCs should be level 7 or 8 at this point, but even with the amount of power they possess, Zanisha can TPK an unaware party. It only takes one failed save against her charm at a critical moment to snowball into a wipe. And she's not above running if the situation turns on her. Her natural climbing ability lets her slither up and down the clock tower, and she has a slow-falling spell in her back pocket so she can jump from the roof or walls to safety. If she flees, she won't immediately link back up with Karzug's forces, afraid of the punishment for failure, but she will try to hunt down the PCs. After all, killing them would pluck the thorn from her master's side and earn her way back into his good graces. However the fight ends, the PCs will have a little time to rummage through Zanisha's things. There's a good bit of treasure here, but the big clue is the crumpled letter from her sister, which speaks of more plans happening somewhere else in Varesia. Where might that be? Well, you'll find out next time in the Hook Mountain Massacre. So yeah, it's near Hook Mountain. Sometimes you have to sacrifice suspense for a good title, alright? And thus ends Book 2 of Rise of the Runelords. While Book 1 felt self-contained, Book 2 really should feel like it's the first stage of a plan, like something bigger the PCs are being pulled into. Hints and teases are becoming clues and portents too big to ignore. Zanisha and her sister are working for someone big. The adventure, and the PC's troubles, has only just begun. Now, personal opinion on this part, it's got a good hook and idea, but a few times where it meanders around. The sanatorium feels like a side quest, and the Foxglove townhouse and Magnamar Sawmill feel a little bit like padding. I think the Sawmill is supposed to be a thematic callback to what happened in Sandpoint, but it's so far removed from that in terms of distance and time for the adventure that I don't think it necessarily works. Foxglove Manor might also get a little tedious to run since there are very few traditional fights. Haunts can be interesting and fun, but it's harder for certain kind of PCs to interact with them, and those players might feel bored or ineffective. If that starts to happen, consider adding a few traditional undead encounters here for the party to fight, or else omit some of the haunts. Still, overall, I think this adventure does a good job of escalating things from last time, threatening Sandpoint once again before prodding the PCs to set out into the wider world. Thank you so much for watching, Pathfinders. What was your favorite part of this book? If I had to pick a favorite in PC, I think it goes to Aisha Foxglove, but I'm not super enamored with any of them here, frankly. I will say Zanisha is a very well-designed boss fight though. I've heard stories of many TPKs from her. Big thanks to my patrons that support me, it really means so much that you do. There's a link to the Patreon down below if you're interested in supporting. I try to get the videos up a day early for $5 and up. Big thank you to Curtis who just joined at that tier, by the way. Please do all the YouTube things, and I'll see you next time in part 3. Until next time, Pathfinders, explore, report, and cooperate.